Hello, Iris J here with Madrona's Pulse Teachings, Astrology for Healing, and we are jumping into this Taurus Lunar Eclipse. We're getting personal. I'm going to go through the houses so that you can see some of the energies that are impacting you in your personal life, psyche. Again, it can show up with an eclipse. It can show up like so literally, and it's external forces that are, or it can also be a very personal shift of a sense of self or shift of how you want to relate. Oftentimes it's both. You do want to look at your chart for this. So you want to see where you have, firstly, 5 degrees of Taurus, okay, because this is a Taurus lunar eclipse. That said, the axis of this eclipse is really important. So it's the Taurus-Scorpio energy in every house. I'm going to talk about that axis and how it's impacting you. Because while we have the sun in Scorpio and the moon in Taurus, another big part of this eclipse is that we have Mercury and Mars right there at 10 and 11-ish degrees of Scorpio. And we've got Jupiter retrograde at 11 degrees of Taurus. And you know what? Jupiter is going to keep going retrograde, and then it's going to get really close and it's going to go to 5 degrees of Taurus in December, and it's going to turn direct, and then it's going to trace over this whole path that it's gone from this eclipse. Okay. So the energies, we're having a lot of transformation really in the Scorpio part of our chart so that we can expand in the Taurus part of our chart. And the reason I'm saying this is because everything from 5 to 11 degrees, it might be 2 houses. So you want to have a look at your chart. It depends on the house system. I'm not going to go into all of that, but you might have, say, 5 degrees of Taurus there in your 5th house. And then it's very possible that you could have that Jupiter already in the 6th house. Okay, so if that's the case, you would listen to 5th and 6th. And I'm going to talk about the axis in both. Okay, most likely you've seen my videos and you've heard me go through the houses before. If this is your first time, then welcome. You can also always just listen to the general energies, and there's a link for the general energies below. And with that, I'm going to jump into the houses and send you eclipse blessings. Let's move through the first house. If you have Taurus, 5 degrees of Taurus in the first house, working with the Scorpio axis, you are in this eclipse zone now through this Taurus eclipse, really working on the tension between who you are in your own embodied, deeply rooted Taurus identity and who you are in relationship. 7th house. That's the axis that you've got Scorpio there in your 7th house. So if you have Scorpio in your 7th house, most likely relationships, this depends on your chart, and if you have other things going on in Scorpio in that house of relationships, but relationships are here for you to enter into deeply. They're here for you to bond deeply. Intimacy is something that is not surface level for you. And so most likely there is energy coming up, potentially charged energy over what it means for you to be who you are in your own identity when you're feeling really grounded in yourself, and also who you show to the world, and who you are when you're in relationship, one-on-one relationship, but definitely all the relationships that you enter into intimate phases with, whether that's your committed partner or whether you do client work and you go into those kind of intimate places, wherever it shows up in your life. It can show up in all different places. And so this is the axis that there's really wanting something to be let go of in the Scorpio realm. Let go of maybe even kind of past memories of what it was like to be in relationships that didn't feel like they supported your strong sense of self, your rooted identity in the world. Maybe you had to kind of twist, or there was not the best power balance, and so you got taught things about being in relationship. We get an opportunity to let those past versions of ourselves go, let the shame go, and take our desire, your desire with a 7th house Scorpio, to be in meaningful, committed and or intimate spaces of relationship, whatever that looks like to you, in a way that really supports a very grounded sense of self, okay? Second house, if you have 5 degrees of Taurus in your second house, then you are working in the second, 8th axis, okay? So you've got Taurus there in your second house, and you've got Scorpio there in your 8th house. Sweet, sweet Scorpio in the 8th. That is deep, 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 deep intimacy. And this is the tension that's coming up with this eclipse for you. Second house, our values, Taurus values. Your values are so important in this life, that you build a life on your values, that you spend money on things that you value, that your work is aligned with your values, especially that your body gets to feel rooted and grounded in your life, that there's a strength there that comes just from being who you are. Really important that you get to have that, and that your deep first layer, that your deep intimate relationships support you in having that grounded sense of self. Scorpio in the 8th house is intense energy. This is where the eclipse is activating this axis for you between that kind of very grounded Taurus sense of a values, foundations of your life, your own resources, the way that your values are the resources that you build your life upon. And so this eclipse is an opportunity to look at how probably experiences in relationship, in intimate relationship, in the whole sphere in which intimacy shows up in so many different places. It shows up in family relationships. It's absolutely in all sexual relationships. Some people actually choose to have sexual relationships without intimacy, but Scorpio in the 8th house, sexual relationships. Work relationships where you do have that bond. If you have people that you journey in your own mental health with, like therapists or teachers, and or if you are a therapist or teacher or counselor, there's intimacy in those types of relationships. So wherever that intimacy shows up, there's this opportunity, this window to let go. And there's a lot of energy for you in that 8th house. If you have Mars transiting Mars and Mercury there too, it's really, really important that you, during this eclipse, get to express what you need to express. And if that is charged, if there is pain, if there is anger, I highly recommend not directing it at another person unless you fully feel aligned with doing that. Absolutely journal, absolutely wood walks and just going in the woods and expressing. But the idea is that there's something in that like deep, deep way. It's also your own mental health. It's also your relationship with things like astrology, potentially your kind of experiential relationship with astrology, with the occult, with the tarot. It could be a time to kind of lean into those communications and to get information about yourself, and also definitely rituals of letting go so that you can build the grounded life that you deserve with that Taurus in the second house. Third house, if you have Taurus in the third house, this is your house of communication. It's your house of smaller communities. It's also the house of siblings, which for some people is very relevant, for others not so much. So you know if that's you. And you have Scorpio up there in the 9th house, in the house of worldview, higher education, learning, publishing, travel, in order to understand yourself and to understand your world. The 9th house is how we make sense of the world. And the 3rd house is the community. Okay. And so Taurus in your 3rd house, and just how you communicate, there's a rootedness. This is an eclipse that's opening a potential for more rootedness in community, more rootedness in your own embodied self, to communicate what you are feeling, when you are feeling it, to share that with community in whatever way resonates with you. And there's something up there in that 9th house to be reactivated in a new way, especially with Mars and Mercury in your 9th house during this eclipse. This could be letting go of things you learned about yourself through a formal education. This could be new education. This could be a new project that you want to share with the world, but just taking some time and seeing what wants to be released. Definitely, I would recommend journaling if you have this 3rd, 9th house access during the eclipse portal, to see what types of ideas do you want to share with community, and whatever community is for you. Okay. 4th house. If you have Taurus in the 4th house where this eclipse is falling, then you have the Scorpio up there in your 10th house. So 4th house Taurus, so important that you get to have a grounded home, that you get to have a grounded, safe for you sense of home, absolutely, in your body, because our body is the home of the psyche, and then it ripples out into our family, into what our actual physical home is. And so part of claiming a new form of kind of ultimately expansive sense of self in your home, and your role in the home, and your role in your own sense of self is up there in the 10th house. How you move through the world, how you're seen in the world, vocation, career, your role, that is really about some of the work you're just here to do in the world. And you got Mars and Mercury transiting in there right now. So there might be strong desires for change. There might be experiences of work that you just have to kind of let go at this point, so that you can find new experiences of how you want to show up, how you want to communicate, what you want your work world, vocation. Again, some folks, this is absolutely the way that we make a living and get paid. Others, it's different types of volunteer work. It depends on our own social and economic class location. If work has been a struggle in your life, this is a time to release some of that past struggle, and so that you can root into the type of life you want in your sense of self, in your home. Taurus in the 4th house is deeply rooted. You could also definitely spend some time in close to earth, meditate with earth, and or that Scorpio water, be with water, especially if you're inviting letting go. Old memories of things that happened in the world, work world, whatever that is for you, let it go, so that you can get a new rootedness in your home, which is firstly yourself. 5th house. If you have Taurus in the 5th house, then you are working with the 5th, 11th axis here in this eclipse. And there is this wanting to be an expansiveness during, let's say, the next 6 months of your creative self-actualization. The 5th house is also the house of children. So if children and or pregnancy is part of your sphere, those themes could definitely be coming up in certain ways with an eclipse. And so it's ultimately, though, our creative self and the way that we create as a human being to actualize our sense of self. And this wants to be expanded. And that means that opposite 11th house, your networks, your friendships, the way that you are networked out into the world. This is social media and also just the people and the connections that we make. That is wanting to transform. That is actually getting a push to become a little different. How do you want to communicate to other folks, whether that is through social media, whether that is through the established networks that you have, but there's something that's wanting to change. This is where Mars and Mercury are during an eclipse, so that opposite end, Jupiter there in your 5th house, can expand. Okay, that's an expansive sense of self for you. The 5th house is your sense of self. So just working within that axis, and most likely, maybe there's been fear around expanding outwards into community in certain ways, showing certain parts of yourself. This is all about your rooted self there in the Taurus energy of the 5th house, wanting to let go some things that you've learned about being seen in the broader sense of the world in bigger communities. Let the negative aspects of that go and get excited to show a strong sense of self out into the world. 6th house. If you have Taurus in your 6th house, or 5 degrees of Taurus in your 6th house where this eclipse is happening, then you are working with the 6th and the 12th axis. So you folks are Scorpio 12th housers, which is a deep, deep experience of spirituality, mysticism. It can also be deep experiences of feeling sometimes potentially as strong as exiled or alienated from certain mainstream society. If that's something that has weighed on you, folks, I beg you to let that weight go, because you are not here to just be moving through the day-to-day like a social butterfly necessarily if you have got Scorpio there in your 12th house, because that is the collective unconscious, that is the mystical experiences, that is dreams, that is the dissolving of the ego. And you're kind of here to dissolve and be in this boundaryless, sometimes murky place that's also the depth of spiritual union with the divine. And there is Mars and Mercury in that 12th house, absolutely communicating. And you want to meditate, write, journal, do whatever it is that lets you listen so that those messages can come up, which is then wanting to go into that Taurus 6th house and really help expand who you are in your day-to-day life, help you get more and more rooted in your day-to-day life. This could have to do with work, it could have to do with family, it could have to do with your health. It's just everything that shows up in your day-to-day life. But this eclipse is an opening for there to be deep transformation coming from that 12th house and then feeding into your rooted sense of self. But also things have to be let go, okay? So especially if there's been fear around also potential gifts that you have with that 12th house energy, open up, let them in. 7th house. If you've got Taurus in your 7th house, then you've got Scorpio in your 1st house. And this 7th house is the house of relationships, one-on-one relationships. So with Taurus in the 7th house, one-on-one relationships are actually a place where you're here to experience a sense of rootedness, a sense of also strength in yourself when you're in one-on-one relationships with others. And in order for this to expand, this kind of rooted sense of this is who I am when I'm in relationship with others, that 1st house Scorpio has got some stuff going on right now. So Mars and Mercury are there, and the Sun, transforming your identity. Okay, like in 1st house is full on your identity, who you're here. It's what the ascendant opens up to the 1st house, who we're here to show to the world. In a very personal sense of self. So there might be some change going on for you. With Mercury there, you really want to open and listen to what your heart is telling you, to who you think you are now. And that sense of changing self, transformation, most likely also letting go of some either previous versions of yourself, versions that you just like, yeah, that was me. I honor that, but I don't need to bring that into the next phase of my life, so that your one-on-one relationships can get more rooted and expand. And also this might be about your role in one-on-one relationships. If one-on-one relationships are in your work, that's definitely part of this role, but just whoever you are in one-on-one relationships, that axis is coming up. Whew. 8th house. If you have Taurus in your 8th house with this eclipse, this is your deep bonded sense of intimacy, of your own mental health journeys, of mental health journeys with others potentially. And you've got Taurus there. So when you have Taurus energy in the 8th house, you know, it's interesting because the 8th house is where we transform, is where we let go of a sense of self. But you've got Taurus there, which is deeply rooted, strong self-sufficiency. So the role that you're here to be when you're in intimate relationships might also be that you're here not to totally lose yourself. You might actually be an anchor for other people at times if you have Taurus in the 8th house. And that role of who you are when you're deeply bonded is wanting to expand. And so the 2nd house, where you have Scorpio during this eclipse, is getting some change into it. 2nd house is your values. It is your resources, your income. It is the foundations that you build your life on. And you have Scorpio there, which sometimes can be that our foundations are absolutely about other people, whether that's family or partners. That might also be where income comes from. Or there might be an opening for change in the way that your foundations are related to other people. You might be going through a transformation of that right now, but it's ultimately about your values, and your values are wanting to change. They're also wanting there to be more drive. That's what Mars and Mercury are doing during this eclipse, so that you can get even more rooted in this very intimate way of being with others and being with life. So if you're not in a committed partnership, the 8th house is still all the ways that you have intimacy with life, okay? And intimacy with other people as well. And again, you're here to be quite rooted in that, and that rootedness is wanting to expand. 9th house. If you have Taurus in the 9th house, this is your way of making meaning of the world. This is the house of higher education. It is the house of how we understand ourselves in terms of other cultures, which is why travel often gets associated with this house. But it's the house of meaning making in the bigger sense. And you have Taurus here, which is quite a rooted way of making sense of the world. It is also potentially a strong earth-based wisdom, earth-based consciousness, and that is wanting to expand. And that means the 3rd house is going through some transformations, which is who you are in community. Siblings can also play into this, and it's absolutely communication. And you got Mars and Mercury during an eclipse in the house of communication. You want to pay attention to what's coming up in yourself, what's coming up in your relationship and community, what is wanting to be transformed, what is wanting to change, what is wanting to be thrown out. I would highly recommend journaling and or therapy if you're feeling tense during this time. But ultimately, it's so that old versions of who you've been as a communicator, as someone in community, can transform so that your worldview can get super rooted. Also opening you up to being a teacher in certain ways with that earth-based consciousness. So have at it. 10th house. If you have Taurus in the 10th house, this is house of career, house of vocation, the role we play in the world at large. It is beyond our sense of self as an ego and really how we move through. And that is wanting to expand for you, okay? Jupiter is wanting to expand for you there. And that means that the 4th house is where you have Scorpio, and that is some transformation at the time. So if you have Scorpio in your 4th house, and this is where that, especially where that Mars and Mercury are, you really want to potentially get quiet during this eclipse so that you can listen to whatever's coming up in yourself. The 4th house is literally how we journey through our own sense of a psyche, and Mars and Mercury are there. So there's most likely some deep internal transformations. Those might also be rippling out into what your home looks like. Home might be going through transition in different ways. And whatever's going on there, also whatever's being released. And if you have Scorpio in the 4th house, if there is childhood trauma, if there is difficult experiences with even the word home, this is a time to really ask for support and just releasing those old versions of home, of life, of who I am in home, and embracing new so that it can help you expand into who you want to be in the world, into who you're here to be in the world, because Jupiter wants to expand that role in the world. 11th house. If you have Jupiter in the 11th house, you know, the first level of this is it's how we're networked into the world, into bigger communities, into networks through social media, networks through friendships, networks through colleagues. And it's the way that all those networks kind of create, expand the role that we're here to have in this life. And so that's where Taurus is, and that is wanting to expand. And the 5th house is where it's Scorpio, and that's wanting to go through some transformations. So if you have Mars and Mercury there, along with the sun in your 5th house, this is your creative self. This is self-actualization. This is the creative energy through which life literally creates itself, which is also why it's the house of children, which could show up during the eclipse in some way. But ultimately, this is about there being a transformation, your creative self-actualization. With Mars there, that is like but it's also Scorpio, so it's very deep. And there's probably some versions of yourself that maybe have been weighing on you, probably from possibly decades ago. It's kind of like you can just let that skin go and go be someone new and enjoy that transformative process, even if it's uncomfortable, because it's wanting to expand your networks. It's wanting to expand abundance in the way that you can just network with other people in a really positive, generative, creative sense of network, not in like a negative, I just am trying to schmooze and put, like, no. That's not you. That's not Taurus. Taurus is rooted out there in the 11th house. So let those roots expand. If you have Taurus in the 12th house, this is where some new roots are wanting to expand, wanting to root you even deeper into first layer mysticism, spirituality, earth-based consciousness, going into the woods or nature in order to commune with the divine. I kind of recommend doing that if you have Taurus in the 12th house during this eclipse. And it's also just all the realms that are beyond the day-to-day. And if you have Taurus here, there's energy here to actually be quite rooted in the 12th house. The 12th house is one of the more sometimes challenging energies for us in our lives. And Taurus there is offering you some strength and rootedness, especially in the ways that you don't mix with the mainstream, in the ways that you go beyond the mainstream, however that shows up, whether it's through spirituality or work for justice making. And in order for those roots to kind of expand, your daily life, your 6th house where Scorpio is wanting to transform, is wanting to let go of some old layers of selfhood that probably come from lessons of family, power structures in society, just socialized conditionings. Let it go. Let yourself transform. Because your daily life is almost wanting some new rhythms, and this eclipse is potentially asking you to invite new rhythms. You might want to get quiet. You might want to do some meditation just to see what comes up, so that you can also let go and invite change in your daily way of living, so that that 12th house can expand its roots into your mystical oneness with the divine, which ain't so bad. And with that, I leave you and send you with eclipse blessings. Blessings.